Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. You know, it's not every day that we get to sit down with reporters from other news outlets. Sometimes we do it, but today we're making a special exception. David Plazas, Opinion and Engagement Director for the Tennessean, joins us as our guest. Born in Chicago, he's the son of a Colombian priest and a mother from Cuba, a first-generation American. After working his way up the ranks in Florida as a print reporter, he moved to Nashville in 2014 with his husband, Darren. And now we'd like to welcome David Plazas to This Is Nashville. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much, Khalil. I admire your work so much, and I'm glad you're here. And I still remember our first meeting at Sonny's, having a chance to get acquainted and hear your story.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for being here. It's been a long time coming, but happy to have you here with us on the show. So let me ask you this. It's 2025, early February. What's on your mind these days?
Well, it is a new administration, but there's also a lot of amazing things locally that are happening. I've been speaking for the last several months on campaigns that we've been working on for years related to civic engagement. We used to call it Civility Tennessee. That name is still out there, but I prefer to talk about citizenship mindset because there are a lot of people who are in pain right now. And I find that there's an opportunity for us in media and in the role that I'm in to go to places like Nashville or Memphis or Knoxville to talk about how to engage productively, but also to disengage, to protect one's mental health. And right now, that's what concerns me. What concerns me is the distractions. What concerns me is the inability for people to cope because they're so angry. And, we've got to find a way to find focus. This is now the time to find focus, so that we can basically live better lives and build community together.
Have you ever gone a day without consuming news? And I know it's got to be hard given your position, but do you ever take a complete fast from news and information?
I can't remember when I've done that in recent years, to be honest with you. I do try to mix it up, so I like to have a very varied diet. Some recent articles that I've been reading or podcasts that I've been consuming have focused on the psychology of pets. I have 2 dogs, and so that brings me a lot of joy. I've also been fascinated. While I'm not on weight loss drugs, I know people who are, and there's been a lot of research that's come out of that. So I've been really fascinated. There's an article from the New York Times that talks about the changes in intimacy among partners when it comes to the usage if one uses those weight loss drugs versus another not using it. So I'm fascinated. I love reading about science, and yes, I can't ignore the news.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about your folks. You grew up in Chi-Town. Mm-hmm. Your father is a Colombian Episcopalian priest. Your mom's from Cuba. Tell me a little bit more about them.
Before my dad was an Episcopal priest, he was a Roman Catholic priest. So he was ordained back in 1957. He met my mom in church. She was played the organ there and was a congregant. And they ended up doing projects together for the school board. He was studying for his PhD at Loyola University in Chicago. And she was a student as well. And he fell in love and made the choice to leave being a Catholic priest, but he didn't want to be away from ministry. It was a passion of his, and so he joined the Episcopal Church, or the Episcopal Church allowed him to become a priest there in the denomination. So my siblings and I are baptized Episcopalian, and so that was really interesting. But we were sent to Catholic schools, so we've had kind of a Catholic education with a little bit of Episcopal principles, but faith has always been a big part of my upbringing. My brother retired from the military. My sister's a principal, and it's been really fascinating. So looking at also the complexities of faith, because faith sometimes, being a gay man, being married, it can be very challenging, and it certainly was for me, trying to rectify or reconcile these things that are sometimes contradictory in the minds of so many people. But it also gave an avenue to explore ideas that sometimes we're afraid to explore.
Something interesting. I haven't heard too often of a priest leaving the Catholic priesthood for love. That is a pretty unusual and powerful story. Tell me this, seeing that your father made this choice when he met your mom, what did your parents teach you and your siblings about love? I mean, this is the type of love that made this man change his future to go to something that he felt was his destiny. That's got to be pretty remarkable to observe growing up.
It's fascinating, and there's actually a newspaper article from one of the Chicago newspapers about his decision to get married that my parents still have. And I think one of the things that it taught me was that sometimes love is not the way that society always says it's supposed to be. Who would think that the Catholic priest and a congregant would get married? And for some people, it's still very shocking. And it was very shocking, they told me. There were a lot of people, they lost a lot of friends, but they also realized that they had each other, and they realized that they built a community, and eventually most people came to support them. And in some ways, there's parallels with me. I've been in my relationship for over 20 years. I'm married, and initially it was a lot of resistance from family and others until they saw that, wait a second, you guys aren't that strange. You guys have, really love and care for each other, and it should be something that is embraced. Obviously, this is not everybody's point of view, but I'm glad that it's my family's point of view now.
And did it take your family a while for them to open up to this new perspective that they're holding on to?
It did. A lot of it were traditional views on masculinity, traditional views on sexuality, and I think we had some really big allies. My biggest ally was my grandmother. We called her Abuelita Virginia. And she passed away in 2019, so she helped raise me. And really, she was the one who started telling people, what's your problem? And in a very kind way. And it really gave me the courage to say, look, we've got to set our place at the table. We can't be afraid. We've got to show up. We've got to be present. And at times it was scary. At times it was like, maybe I just want to go away or run away. But the reality is I knew that I needed to show up and be present and not be ashamed or afraid.
When did you first recognize or realize that you were gay?
Probably when I was 10 and singing Liza Minnelli in the shower.
Okay. What song? Something from...
Probably something I heard from I'm sure it was something from Cabaret. Like I love musicals, and so I had my parents bought me cassette tapes, of all those things. And but more seriously, it was more, I felt different, but I didn't know how to act on those things, and so I was very self-conscious during high school about those, very strict, not wanting to be with anyone or anything because I was just afraid of it. And it was finally when I was in college, I did have a relationship with a woman who's still a very good friend of mine today, but realized that this was not, I needed to follow what my truth was. And that can be difficult because especially in times when people feel that it is sinful or in some cases, anathema, you have to fight a current, so to speak. Today it's much more normalized than it was before, but we even see some of the, anti-trans, type of sentiment or anti-whatever it might be that, we're constantly fighting to showcase our humanity.
We're both Gen Xers, and as you noted, society is a lot more open to same-sex marriage and same-sex relationships than they were when we were growing up. I can imagine being 10 years old, growing up in Chicago, all the influences, people telling you how you are supposed to be as a male, particularly as a Hispanic Latino male. There's these ideas of who you're supposed to be. What was growing up in Chicago like for you? Your parents were very strict. They gave you guys a regimen of discipline. Did you have a chance to explore things on your own and start to kind of forge your own way outside of the shadow of your parents as you were growing up in the Windy City?
Yeah, in a couple of ways. So there were two things. On the one hand, I grew up in the Rogers Park neighborhood near Loyola University, which today, if one goes there, it's a very gentrified area. When I was growing up in the 80s, it was not. My uncle's van was torched. It was, you had gang activity. But it was still, we were in a building where my parents and my family lived on the top floor, two aunts and their families on the first floor in the basement, an uncle and his family. So I grew up with family, and we were in each other's business all the time. But we were sent to parochial schools. There were some issues with the public school system not opening on time because of strikes, employee strikes. And so my parents made the sacrifice to send us to Catholic schools. And I remember early on, I think I must have been around 6, my brother, who's older than me, we were going to the same school at the same time. He was 4 years older than me. We stopped by this arcade, which was one of those arcades that had, hot dogs, Vienna hot dogs and a couple of games. And I wanted to go home. And he said to me, if you want to go home, just take the bus by yourself. And I did. And so this is something we never told my mom until many, many, many years later, that I learned how to take the bus by myself at 6. I was just talking to a cousin of mine a few days ago who was in town for a visit, that, the Gen X stuff that we were able to do as kids of just get lost, of, travel on our own, that would be seen as very, very dangerous today.
Yeah, impossible. I mean, I think parents will get prosecuted for it. I mean, we grew up in an era where certain family members would send you to the corner store to get them a beer or a pack of cigarettes, and it was okay. Not to say that I agree with that, but there was a little bit of an ease and trust in us that you wouldn't try to sneak a smoke or take a sip of that beer to bring it back. And, there's something different about that. I think it gave us a confidence that we could rely on ourselves and a little bit of a trust. Have you ever thought about that?
It's a great way that you put it. I don't know if I've given it that much thought, but it's true. You're making me, it evokes memories of hanging out with family members, and, we'd travel together, almost like in packs. We'd play tag in alleyways, all these other things that were just beautiful memories. And there are times that I'm nostalgic for the pre-cell phone days and, and pre-email days where you could just kind of get lost and enjoy each other's company and conversation. And I think one of the things I think about a lot these days, you asked that question early on, is I think the best ways to build community is to do it in person and to do it one conversation at a time, because you can text, you can email, but it's not the same as being in the presence of somebody and really trying to share a beautiful moment.
Yeah. You went to Northwestern, right?
I did.
I understand you had an experience in Spain that kind of changed the course of your life. Tell me about that.
It really did. So I applied for a program. It was a year-long study abroad program. I was interested in Latin America, but they had no year-long study abroad programs, and so I made it into the Spain program. And for my whole junior year, I was in Seville, Spain, the south of Spain, which is a beautiful area. It's a mix of North African and Moorish architecture and European architecture, and a lot of traditions, such as the Easter Sunday traditions, where you have these groups, these guilds that are going out showcasing their Virgin Mary statues or Jesus statues, and they wear outfits that one might confuse with the Ku Klux Klan because their hoods oftentimes are colored, but it's a really ancient, beautiful traditions. The food was magnificent, and the friends I made from there were 16 of us who were part of that program, Americans, and we are still close to this day. We get together every few years. I just saw them last year. Awesome. We got together at a restaurant near Northwestern. It was a Spanish restaurant, and we continuously conversed with each other. When COVID hit, we created a WhatsApp group and occasional Zoom get-togethers, and it was wonderful to see that. And I get to see that. A few of them I see almost every year. Did
that experience change the way you looked at your home country, United States?
It really did. It helped me appreciate my Americanness, but also realize how, in many ways, I'm more American than I thought I was. I kind of live in this echo tone of I'm neither from here nor there, because for some people I was too American. For a lot of my Latino friends, I was too gringo-ish for, and too Latino for some other folks who were American. And so there, to the Spaniards I went to school with, I was very much an American who happened to have some Latin American roots.
Okay.
And I remember I was approached by a student who said to me, why did America attack Spain in 1898? And I didn't have an immediate answer to that, but it was I eventually did research it, but it was one of those things where there's a great sense of history among Europeans who have, whose empires and other countries have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And really learning to be out of my element and out of my comfort zone was absolutely quite beautiful. And when I arrived in Spain, I grew up speaking Spanish. I did not understand one thing that was said to me because of the dialect that is spoken there in Seville, the Andalusian dialect. And so it's very fast to cut off consonants. And so it took me a while to acclimate, but eventually I did. And I also got to have some amazing food experiences, such as, when I got there, I neither liked coffee nor gazpacho, calamari, a lot of things beer, didn't like any of that stuff. And by the year's end, I was like, this stuff is great. Love it.
I mean, nothing's going to turn you like some Spanish coffee, I imagine. How did that experience of being out of your comfort zone and learning new things about yourself, how has that aided you in your career as a journalist?
Sure. I think I've always been a writer, and I like to journal, and so I would write a lot every single day. And actually, this is what caused me to become a journalist. I was a pre-law student at Northwestern. I was studying political science. I was planning to go to law school. My dad, being the immigrant dad he was, you can be a lawyer, doctor, engineer, pick one. And I was like, okay, law makes sense because I love to write. But I was writing long form letters to people back in the United States, and one of my mentors, Melba Rodriguez, sent me this letter back saying, you have really got to focus on your writing, and you should put off law school for a while. I know it's going to be really tough, but this might change your life. And because I had been writing for a newspaper for free, I was writing articles for a student newspaper on traveling across Spain, traveling throughout and showing my own perspective as an American, seeing everything wide-eyed. And I decided to take her advice. And my dad initially was not happy.
Yeah.
Today, though, I'm very glad he's very proud of me. And I've been in the business for 25 years and never been back to law school.
And then I was thinking about law school upon college graduation and decided not to. Mm-hmm. My father was not happy as well, but he's happy with what I'm doing now. So our dads can be proud of their sons making the right choice for themselves. Okay, so I'm going to go to break after this question, but I think it's really important. You're a news reporter and an editor. You were early in your career. I imagine you weren't allowed to share your opinions publicly on things. How did you end up writing opinion columns? And tell me why you pursued that avenue.
Sure. I've always been a fan of column writing. I grew up with people like Mike Royko from the Chicago Tribune, famous columnist there. And I love that kind of writing. And I knew that I needed to be a reporter as a start. So I always had an ambition to be an opinion writer. But at the time when I started in 2000, there was still this thinking that you have to wait 30 to 40 years down the line in your career. It's going to be like the last thing you do. It's your plum assignment. But everything changed with the internet, and everything changed with social media, Craigslist, that disrupted business models for newspapers. And suddenly there were new opportunities for young people. I was in my late 20s at the time to take on jobs that had been for people at the end of their careers because they really wanted to grow. And so I became a community conversation editor, which was an opinion editor for the News Press in Fort Myers, Florida, where I was at the time. But it was also about being in and of the community because that's a skill that I had as a reporter and for a time as a Spanish language community editor. I knew how to connect with people in a very personal and intimate way. I knew how to do reporting. I actually had to learn how to become an opinion writer because it was hard. I'd been so used to just talking about what is happening, observing the facts, and I had to learn how to find my own style. And still to this day, I consider myself a reporter first, and I like to guide people to conclusions based upon the facts we have rather than hammering someone on the head that you have to believe my opinion. In fact, that's one of the worst ways to get people to change their minds. I think oftentimes you can persuade people by offering facts and offering testimony storytelling. Storytelling is the way that you get people to at least empathize and consider some new arguments.
You were a young man when you get this opportunity. Opinion writers, we kind of looked at them for this wisdom that they offer. Young people don't often have a lot of wisdom with them. You can acquire it. There's old souls and experiences that people have. They're all very different. What approach, how much do you appreciate the wisdom that you've accumulated throughout your life that you're able to put into your work as an opinion editor now?
Well, I'm very fortunate that I grew up in a time where there were still larger newsrooms. And so I had a staff of 5. And among them were people who were 40 plus. So 2 editorial writers, one of them who was a retired executive editor, a retired Pulitzer Prize winner, who mentored me throughout this process. And so I had that good fortune of not just being on my own. And I remember a few years later when I arrived at the Tennessean, we were, the newsrooms were much smaller than they had been. And I was lamenting the fact that, these 30, 40-year veterans are no longer here to help, that younger generation. And friend of mine said to me in the newsroom, said, well, now you're the veteran. So you're going to be the one to have to figure this out. So some of it is by trial and error, but a lot of it is also learning from the people in my life. 2 editorial writers, Mark Stevens and Dan Warner, were fundamental in helping me figure out how to navigate opinion. And what I think what I helped teach them was really that the value of getting out of the office, really being intimately effective. We had a situation related to pollution and river water, which is environmental issues, a huge issue there in Florida, as it is in many parts of the country. And we were able to create some substantive change at the local level to get a river watcher there to help local government determine when things were going bad in terms of algal blooms, because that was destructive for the economy and for tourism and for the environment as well. So it was really something that was wonderful to see that there was an effect to the kind of work that we were doing.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with our guest, David Plazas, Opinion and Engagement Director for the Tennessean. We'll speak to him about how he perceives the Nashville boom, its benefits, its shortcomings, and what he's written about. Don't go anywhere. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com. Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Colonna, and this is Nashville. Welcome back to the show. Our guest is David Plazas, Opinion and Engagement Director for the Tennessean. We started off by speaking about his formative years in his early life. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about his work here in Nashville. He moved here in 2014, arguably when the city really began its transition from the sleepy town to a growing metropolis. And we're all here today. We understand what that's like. A lot has changed since then. For locals, affordable housing remains an issue, a big-time issue. So we're going to dive in. David, again, thank you for being here with us.
Absolutely, Cleo.
You know, you do a lot of reporting on affordable housing. You've been out here for a long time. You've seen the city change, 11 years. What's your perspective on the issue?
Sure. I think right now it's an issue that has gotten out of control, to be honest with you. And, you know, there were two stats that I was looking at. I did a year-long series on affordable housing back in 2017 called The Cost of Growth and Change in Nashville. And the two stats were about the rise in rents, which at the time, over a decade, was about 57%, and the rise in wages, which was about 7%. So there was a massive delta in people, especially native Nashvillians or longtime residents, being able to afford the cost of living. And actually that idea, I was a little bit afraid at first to tackle this topic when I first got in because it was so huge. And I really started at transit at first, interestingly, because I love riding the bus and the train. I'm from Chicago, and the public transit system is not to that level here in Nashville. But I started taking the bus once a week for a whole year, which is more than the vast majority of people do, because only about 2% of the population of Middle Tennessee takes transit. But I kept on hearing all these conversations about the cost of living and not recognizing Nashville. When I take Ubers or Lyfts, you know, during the weekend to go to shows and downtown or so forth, I'd hear the same thing. People don't recognize that it was getting too expensive. And that was back in 2014, 2015. And at that point, I knew that this was the issue that we had to tackle in different ways. And I told that story through the stories of others. So it wasn't just me saying, this is what we got to do. It was, first of all, most important, putting a mirror to Nashville, because Nashville had been glowing at its city vibe that New York Times had come out with. And, and yeah, Nashville, there's so many wonderful things and great things about the city, the hospitality, the food, the music scene, all these other things. But, you know, Nashville was proud of its progressive bona fides, but the reality is we weren't seeing it play out when it came to people's quality of life every single day. And not just, I'm not talking about if you're affluent, I mean, Nashville's a great place to be in, but the vast majority of people are not. And when you have people who live in the outskirts or are pushed out of the county, out of Davidson County, that becomes very difficult because the transit system isn't equipped at this time to be able to bring people in efficiently like it is in a place like Chicago where I grew up. So I think right now we're at a point, you know, back then in 2017, our affordable housing need for apartments was about a third. You know, there was a report that came out that said that we needed about 18,000 units of affordable housing, affordable rents. And then just Mayor Cooper, the last mayor, before Freddie O'Connell, had commissioned a task force that showed that actually now we're going to need 54,000 units of affordable housing over the next few years. So it accelerated. And a lot of it is no surprise. We have so many people moving in. You know, we have an average of about 30,000 people. Growth here in Nashville. And even though we had somewhat of a dip during COVID for a year, we're back up. We're still growing fast. And when you have people coming in with money to buy cash houses, when you've got a real estate market that is so hot that it's left so many people behind, this is a very difficult thing to do. The solution that it's the most difficult one is asking neighbors to accept the fact that people of other incomes live in their neighborhood. And we don't have a history of doing that. And so when you talk about YIMBYism or NIMBYism, you know, obviously nobody wants to be unsafe or feel unsafe, but there's a difference between feeling unsafe and actually opening your neighborhood to opportunities for other people. And that's a difficult thing. And we've missed several opportunities in the last couple of years.
You know, in my lifetime, I've lived in some different neighborhoods, you know, and neighborhoods that now are very gentrified. And people have this understanding that they're being unsafe in certain places. I lived above MS-13 gangsters when I lived in Los Angeles. I was very safe. We were cool with each other. I addressed them. They're human beings. They were fathers, family people who happened to have some nefarious employment. But we related to each other as community members. I don't know if a lot of Nashvillians have had that experience. And I hear people say they continue to care about housing, affordable housing, but the city is very, very slow to react. And so it makes me ask, do they actually care? And, I say that because you're telling stories to get people to care, to make something happen. What do we need to do as far as the storytelling about how people in Nashville are struggling in order to make it by? A few weeks ago, we had a guest on who was talking about the poverty line. And she said 13% of Nashvillians are, quote unquote, according to the federal government definition, suffering from poverty. But there's a 43% who are the working poor, meaning that you're standing in line at the grocery store, 4 out of 10 people are having to make a decision between what they purchase. Do they buy full set of groceries for themselves and their family, or do they pay their rent? This is the situation for so many folks, but we talk about it, but it feels like there's very little action. What stories are going to get people to care and to take action?
Sure. I think, for example, when I did this series, 2 stories come to mind. And one is a woman whose name is Sally Dowell. She was in her 80s at the time, and she had bought her home. She was an African-American woman who worked as a maid at houses in Belmead to make money to buy her house for $29,000 back in the 70s. And now, at the time in 2017, that same house would have gone for $650,000, for the land, really, not for the house. It was a ranch house, and all around it were being built these tall and skinny that were going to be turned into Airbnbs, for example, or VRBOs. And so it was really fascinating. She didn't want to move. We actually did a documentary where we showcased some of that resistance, and she wanted to keep her place in there because this was an Edge Hill. This was a traditionally black working class neighborhood, and now it's been rebranded to some, at least, as the South Gulch. And so a lot of that notion of erasure, who gets to live here? We have a problem in Nashville, which is that we have a lot of economic segregation, in addition to the historic discrimination from Jim Crow from the past, but a lot of that still exists, and it's very present in the economic segregation, because it used to be that in the urban core, it was more, working class, black, brown, and the reality is that so many people since 2000 have been moving in, generally white, affluent, and this is not just a Nashville trend, this is all over the country. Yeah. But it's something that Nashville was not equipped to deal with because we don't have the transit system, and the growth has been so exponentially fast. Now, there have been a lot of movements from mayors like Mayor O'Connell and past mayors to really try to invest, but it's just too quick. It's like a fire hose of sorts. One of the solutions, I think, is to make sure that you allow for varied types of housing, which is incredibly controversial. You tell people you're going to get rid of single-family home zoning, people are going to revolt like they did in 2024, early 2024, with the legislation from the Metro Council called NEST, where West Mead residents said, we don't want this. It's really important, I think, to get the community on board, but there are some big fears. I was at a community meeting at the Edmondson Pike Library back last year, where one of the council members, Quinn Evans Seagull, was holding a meeting about this legislation to rezone, or at least to consider rezoning. And many these were working class residents, mostly white, but a combination, who basically said, we're afraid of the bachelorette parties coming all the way down to Edmondson Pike, which sounds absurd in a sense because that's really far from downtown, but it's a perception. It's that perception of feeling like what you have and what you own, what you've had for 30 years is going to suddenly disappear and you'll be left with nothing. And so I think, we have to find some way to create a mindset where people can say, yes, we can live in the same place, next to each other. And I live in Salem Town, which had been a predominantly black working class neighborhood for many, many years. Today, it's has become mostly affluent. But it also is home to the Mission for women, and it's also going to host Inspiritus, which is going to be a high rise for elderly and disabled people who need affordable housing. One of our biggest problems right now, though, too, is that aside from folks who are in poverty, is folks who are middle class and who don't qualify for any kinds of subsidies. And even for people who are making low six figures, it's a very difficult market, especially if you're competing against cash buyers. And so I've hosted or moderated an event at Belmont University last year on accessible housing, because that term continues to change, that goalpost, because affordable means something different to different people. And it used to be that affordable scared people, who said, well, this means the neighborhood's going to go down the toilet. Whereas accessible now, you're like, well, my nephew makes $100,000 and can't afford even a house here, despite the fact that just has turned it on its head. If we look at data from the last 5 to 6 years, pre-COVID versus this post-pandemic era, essentially it's so much more expensive to afford a home and I can speak specific to Nashville because I've seen those stats, but your household income could have been in the high 50,000s and you could have afforded a home. Today it has to be in the low $100,000, about $106,000 to be able to compete in the market. And people don't, they simply can't adjust like that.
Yeah. So has Nashville changed for better or worse, or is it just different?
I think it's, in many ways, it's changed for the better. I don't think it's gotten worse, in my time here. I really have grown to love the city a lot for its amenities, and it's, in some cases, some of the things that to me are really unusual. When I first arrived here, I told the person who recruited me, I said, do I have to like country music? And she said, no, but you better learn to appreciate it. And really, I've become a big fan. I'm a big fan of the Country Music Hall of Fame. You might see me at a honky-tonk, but during the day, you'll probably never, ever see me at night, with a rare exception if I'm out with for having some visitors or some friends. But there's beautiful restaurants. There's wonderful places to explore. And probably for me, the thing that gives me the most hope about Nashville, I'm a huge fan of the park system here. And so I mentioned I'm a runner. And so whether it's Bicentennial Park or Shelby Park or the Greenways, I mean, those are things that are absolutely gorgeous. So some of the amenities that we have seen have grown, and some of the investments in trying to make that more equitable, across different parts of the county have been very, very good for Nashville. But we have not yet lived up to our potential of those progressive policies that we claim to cherish.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekolona. We're talking with David Plazas, Opinion and Engagement Director for the Tennessean. So you think you're going to stay?
Yeah, I mean, that's my intention is to stay. I mean, one never knows, because you have and I don't mean equivocally. I never imagined I'd be here over 10 years. I actually enjoyed Fort Myers, Florida a lot. I had a community, I had a church, loved the work that I was doing, and this was a risk to come here, but it was a booming city that offered so much opportunity. So for me, it's been a blessing to be here. For me and my family, we absolutely love it. I walk my dogs in the morning every day, and that's actually, I get some peace, listen to some music, listen to my podcast. I know you're a big music fan, and I am currently obsessed with Bad Bunny's Debí Tirar Más Fotos. I should have taken more photos, which has been a beautiful, beautiful album. And I just mentioned it just because you can enjoy these experiences. I will tell you just very quickly, when I ran that marathon, my first marathon was a Music City Marathon here in Nashville back in 2016. My first and only, I should say. But I saw the bands, as you're running, you get to see all this live music around. You get to see the people cheering you. And then I'm listening in the last 13 miles to Music Cast. And you get to see just what a remarkable place this is. So there are a lot of policy issues that I wish had been accelerated. There's a lot of reasons for that, whether it's for legislative reasons, for changes in mayoral administrations. But I think this is still a really great place to live.
We were doing a couple of episodes called This is Nashvillians, where we have kind of everyday Nashvillians come on and in a creative manner tell us what they want. And a guest on the show, frequent guest on the show, Willie Big Fella Sims, I'm sure you're familiar with him, came on and he talked about Nashville becoming a world-class city. What do we need to become a world-class city on par with a Chicago, Los Angeles, London?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, right now, I was just in Atlanta not too long ago for a family reunion and went into the city, and I had not spent too much time there, and that city is huge. I had no idea how huge it was because I've spent time mostly in the suburbs where my parents live, and I think a lot of it is time and intentionality. I mean, Nashville is still, from a big city standpoint, is still very young. It had been known as a small town for so long, even though it's been around for nearly 2 centuries. But that whole citification, and that also has tensions to it as well. I had a chance to have a Uber driver who took me from one place to the other, and she was born and raised in Madison, and she said she looked at downtown and said, I don't even recognize this place anymore, and I can't afford to live here. So I mentioned it just in the standpoint of, we are a big city. We've got to embrace it. The one thing that I hope that we are very sensitive to is that this is also a place where people will pick up the phone, when you give them a call, where people will be hospitable, people want to make introductions. So we haven't lost that sense of hospitality that I think makes it so special. And that's one thing I know that a lot of people that I talk to fear is that if we become too big or grow too fast, that we'll lose that sense. The question is, when people come, will they also take that same energy and spread it and pay it forward, so to speak? And I hope so. I'm trying to do that, and I hope that others do that as well. That
is the $64,000 question. All right, we're going to take one last break. When we return, we're going to continue our conversation with David Plazas. We're going to tackle his wheelhouse, journalism, and the trade's relationship with the general public. Stay with us. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Colonna, and this is Nashville. Welcome back to the show. If you're just joining us, we have David Plazas, Opinion and Engagement Director for the Tennessean, live with us in studio. Now, David shared with us his upbringing and his thoughts on Nashville. Now we're going to move arguably to one of the most important issues facing the media today, rebuilding the public trust. David, thank you again for being here. Rebuilding the public trust has seemed to be on the conversation of journalists and people in media, at least for the past 10 plus years. What do you think led to that dissolution of trust between us and the media and the folks we are serving?
Yeah, I think this precedes the current time. And what I mean by that is for a long time, when I can speak specifically to the newspaper industry, when we were very separate from, let's say, consumer or the sales side, we were assuming we knew what people wanted. And yes, we had some beats, we organized them, we told the news for a specific audience, but we weren't always as engaged in the communities we should have been. And over time, what I have seen, through the disruptions that we've seen in the industry, from social media to growing political polarization, is that, in fact, the way that you connect people, or at least try to have a conversation, is by being present. And I'll give you a quick anecdote, which is in 2018, I was invited to take my civility show to McMinnville, Tennessee. And McMinnville is about 80 miles east of Nashville.
I like McMinnville.
It's great. And I went to the Rotary Club, had fried chicken and cherry pie with the folks there. And I spoke a little bit about the work that we were planning to do because it was a brand new initiative. And the first person who stood up to ask a question said, "Why should we trust you?" And I have those words in a picture at my desk just to remind myself to be able to answer that question every single day. And I answered him the best I could about the intentions that we had. And he was willing to accept it and hear it. And I was so appreciative that I've been back 6 times since then. So I've been to McMinnville 7 times to moderate forums, to go to Rotary Club meetings, to really develop a relationship, and even included it in a book that I contributed to recently about reinventing democracy in this new age. And so I realized that being present in those spaces is so important. We can't just be the stereotype, which I think many people had, that we are looking down upon people who may vote differently or may have different thoughts, that they may think that we're just these, these liberals who are kowtowing to the Democratic Party, when in fact we can't afford to do that. We really have to create a space for people of different points of view, at least from the opinion side, to be able to debate and engage with each other in different ways. Back in December of 2024, the top 2 read pieces on our opinion page, which were very controversial but espoused really powerful ideas. One was by a Christian nationalist talking about how he believed that rural red Tennessee was the future of the state. And we had a far left person, kind of like in a la Martin Luther, putting her grievances, the 19th thesis for why Trump is going back to the White House, a very fiery type of argument for it. And I think people want to have a space to speak with each other. One of the things that we talk about a lot these days with my colleagues is the whole notion of how do we create spaces where people feel heard and amplified on places like ours, whether it's WPLN or whether it's the Tennessean, that have massive audiences, but at the same time not do too much to gatekeep to the point of stifling someone.
Yes.
People don't want to be filtered, and they can go to TikTok, they can go to Instagram or other places. Now, they may not be able to get the audience that we can, but we have to find a way to negotiate and not assume that we know everything. So I think a little bit of humility is good, and certainly I've made my fair share of errors in trying to figure out what this, how to make this happen, because it's a continuing thing. I think a lot of times, people tend to say, well, it's a symptomatic of, having Trump back in the White House. And I said, I don't think so. I think certainly, for me as a journalist, I've had to prepare for that reality for months. I've been there. The economic data that I saw from the micro level, being that I focus so much on housing and other economic issues, I had a feeling back in September this was going to happen. So not that I'm a seer or anything, I wasn't sure, but I had to prepare back then. What are we going to do basically to use the lessons we've learned so that we can connect people with each other, because distractions are real right now. And so I think that's what we need to do, not say that we have all the answers, but we're going to create aspects to let people know that they're being heard. So one thing that, tangible thing that was out there, I put out a survey recently because you're probably aware that there's 2 legislators that have proposed legislation that changed the name of Nashville International Airport to Trump International Airport.
Yes.
So that's a real piece of legislation. And from that, a change.org petition came out and said, no, name it Dolly Parton. So I just did a little, at first, just have some fun. Let's get some opinions. We were flooded with commentary. And I recently published the results a recent weekend, and people wanted to be heard. And most people were on the pro-Dolly side for this particular survey. It's an unscientific survey, of course, but there were a lot of other people who had other ideas. Talking about make it Johnny Cash Airport, or make it Andrew Jackson Airport, or Cornelia Fort, who was an aviator from a long time ago. And so I think people want to be heard and want to speak in this conversation. We have to figure out a way to be relevant and present and do it in a way that's authentic. And that's very difficult, especially when you have so much, so many demands on our attention, whether it's social media or other things. But I think that relevancy, that consistency is going to be what helps us continue to do the work that we're doing that continues to evolve as well.
You're speaking of social media. TikTok is on the rise. TikTok is here. A lot of people, journalists, have been using TikTok to get messages out there, to get their stories out there. How have you adapted to this new technology? I mean, you're like me, you're old school. And everything else, Generation Xers were old school. You probably work on a typewriter when you began your career. And now you can write up a script, go on and create a reel on Instagram, or I don't know what it's called on TikTok. Let's imagine it's called a reel. Get your stories out that way. How do you adjust and use that, but still maintain that connection with the audience and, most importantly, the trust?
Yeah, so I'm relatively new to TikTok, to getting those videos out there, because I found that there was value. At first I was like, do I have to do a dance? Do I have to do something? And I realized you don't. When you start studying, you realize you can just say something, and sometimes the video will take off and sometimes they won't. But I did a video recently related to the whole Nashville International Airport conversation, and I've been responding to certain comments, not to all of them because there's so many of them, but which was unusual because I wasn't used to getting so much engagement on that platform. But I remember not too long ago, I had someone who said they recognized me from TikTok. And this is someone who was young, was definitely not a print newspaper reader, but I said there's something there because we need to reach audiences. We can't abandon our professional obligations to provide depth. But at the same time, we have to be willing to allow people to have that conversation and be accessible. One thing I learned during the 2023 mayoral election, and we did 4 debates in partnership with several news organizations, and we also had these long-form Q&As, is that sometimes people just want the bullet point items.
Yeah.
And we are not used to doing that as journalists. I speak for myself. I was used to doing the long-form stuff, and I was at a bar in Germantown where a friend kept on asking me, tell me who to vote for, and I wouldn't. And then I started asking him, does it matter what their political affiliation is? Does it matter what their top, 3 priorities are? Because we knew those from the questionnaire. And it allowed him to think about who his choice was. And I said, I need to put this out there. And it became a hit. We, within 2 weeks, had drawn 200 new subscribers just because people said, you are helping us make a choice. Remember, there were 12 candidates in that early round.
Oh, yeah.
You are helping us make a decision without telling us what to do. And I think there's a lot of appreciation. Opinion journalism has changed that way. It's not about saying, you must do this, but rather, I've had this access and I've done this work. I'm going to show you the receipts, but at the same time, I'm going to help you come to your own conclusion. And you're going to be responsible. You're going to own that decision, but just know that you're going to be well informed when you do that. 2
questions. One, how did it feel when this young person came up to you and basically told you you were lit?
I think I was blushing. So, I was a little bit embarrassed about it, but at the same time, I felt proud. I felt proud that it was seen. And one of my and these are not like super viral TikToks, but they get, some of them have gotten several thousand views. And one of them that I still remember was on election day. It was before the results were out, and I just took a long walk just to clear my head. And I passed by these 2 houses. One had a pro-Trump sign, one had a pro-Harris sign, one was pro-transit, anti-transit, and so on. And I just had did a video along with the soundtrack of a Chappell Roan song. And it just within just a few hours had 5,000 views on it. And I was like, this is just amazing. It was better than when I first started, it was like maybe 100 or 200 views. And then suddenly people were looking for something that was not going to be so caustic. And I think that, for me, that's not my brand is not to be caustic or to provoke or to inflame, but it really is to help create some level of understanding and to learn and to realize that I also am learning in this process, and I want to connect with you because I care deeply about the community.
You said you wanted to help guide people to make their own decision, but most importantly, they had to own it. It doesn't seem like folks are owning their positions or their decisions these days.
Well, ultimately that's their decision, right? We can only take people so far, and the reality is that I think where there's value in journalism, and I've been so proud to see places like the Tennessean grow during this time. We've seen growth both in terms of reporters. We have new beats from First Amendment to other things, but I think at the end of the day, how can we be of service to people who are trying to understand the world? I think in some ways, as difficult as this may sound, this might be one of the best times, one of the best tests for us as journalists. This era where there's a lot of distraction and a lot of unrest and a lot of fear, where we can say, let's help explain things as best we can. And I think one of the most difficult things for a lot of people is that they want certainty. They want to know that everything is the same, and it's not. This is the real world. We are in a disrupted environment where we have to do our best to just explain the things as we know them as best we can, and maybe find that niche where we can say, this is what I really know. Like the mayor's race, I knew all the candidates. I'd spoken to all of them, so I could speak on that. And for things I don't know about, I try not to opine.
It's time to adapt and adjust.
Yeah.
Final question for you: how has your writing and reporting, how has it made an impact on someone's life? You could be exposing a sleazy landlord or what have you. When you look back at your career at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I've told this story before only because it's one that still stays with me. It was back over 20 years ago. I was a reporter, and I had the opportunity to work with this family that was from Chile, South America, and the mother was desperately trying to get an operation for her son who had a deformity called clubfoot, so he couldn't walk. And she was trying to raise money. She had overstayed her visa. And I was told about her by one of my sources out in the community, in the Latino community in Fort Myers, Florida. And she was supposed to raise $10,000, had raised $300 by that point, and was desperate. And I said, let's talk about your story. I spent a lot of time with the family, met the boy, and who was, I think, 6 at the time, and wrote this story just telling their whole piece. We weren't hiding anything. I mean, they were honest about what was happening in terms of their immigration status, but they also did this out of love. And I wasn't sure what kind of reaction I was going to get, but the first phone call I got the next day when the article came out, it was a front page story, was from the Shriners Hospital saying, we saw your story, we want to give this boy the operation for free.
Wow.
And 6 months later, I went back to visit with the family, and the little boy was running around.
Wow.
And that brought so much joy to my heart because, yes, I've written articles that have called for mayors and other officials to resign or to step aside, but that has never been as gratifying as seeing that family feel whole and feel like they felt welcome. And that to me still it warms my heart to this day.
I know I said that was the last question, but you said something that made me think with that really beautiful, touching story. What charge do you want to give to journalists and people in the media space today?
I think the charge I want to give is that we need to be in a constant state of mentorship and learning. I have found that even though I'm a Generation Xer, sometimes people say, well, you guys are getting old and so forth.
I don't feel old.
I don't feel old at all either. but I found that I'm still very much of service, especially to some of my younger colleagues who are still trying to develop their social skills, especially in the COVID era. I said something in the news from a few years ago where I said, I used to knock on people's doors and get a comment about something, and people were like, you went up to people? I'm like, yes, went up to people. And I think the charge is that this is still important work. This has never been more important to be out there and be present. And yes, at times it will feel very scary. And the biggest challenge, I think, is to build the community, your micro communities, whether it's your family, whether it's your colleagues, whether it's your friends, and to build upon each other and try not to bring each other down. Really, you say, be good to each other. I mean, that's powerful because that is one of those things where you're going to have a lot of people who are going to be very bad to you and who are going to say very nasty things to you. And I certainly get that. I'm sure you get that as well. But at the end of the day, I'm gratified by the beautiful community that has become part of my life here in Nashville and beyond. I just came back from a family reunion, saw my dad, saw 30-some relatives, and coming back, I felt tremendously charged from the fact that there are so many good things happening. And we have the opportunity with a word and to make people's lives better.
David Plazas is the Opinion and Engagement Director at the Tennessean. David, thank you very much for being here with us. Really, it's been a long time coming, and I'm glad you were here on the show. Appreciate
Thank you for the opportunity, Khalil. It's an honor to be here.
All right, thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Josh Deepan. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operators, Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. Comment and tell us what you want to hear from the show by leaving us a message at 615-751-2500. And you can find us on the socials, Blue Sky, Instagram, and X at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Kaliole Colonna. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And be good to each other.